Hey friends, I want to welcome you back to one more episode of the She Is podcast. Today, I get to sit down with Katherine Bright. Katherine is a survivor of a high-risk pregnancy that nearly took her life along with her son's life. And through that experience, she lost complete trust in her body. And now she thrives with an abundance of resilience to live life to its fullest. And she also helps guide others in discovering their own physical resilience. So, Katherine, I will hand it over to you and you can share what you feel like sharing and see where the conversation goes.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Totally.
I'm excited to share my story, and it's one that, I'm going to say is some aspects of it are common for, some women who do go through pregnancy to childbirth, and with just understanding some of the complexities around it. And a little bit more background. So my first, so this, the complex, complicated pregnancy was the second pregnancy for me. And my older son's pregnancy was pretty typical, nothing out of the ordinary. And, was a very late baby, about 2 weeks, which was fine, but that's typical. And so, we knew, my husband and I knew we wanted a second child. And so when that time came and everything came into fruition, and a little bit back up, my older son wound up being born by C-section, just because he refused to come.
Stubborn.
Yeah. Oh yeah. He is a stubborn child, but I love him and it will serve him well. And we're just working on shaping that. So, but yeah, so cleared for VBAC, which was awesome, because I was like, I really, wanted to go the other way. It was like, as long as medically everything was fine, cool, awesome. Trust my OB, phenomenal doctor, phenomenal hospital, and everything else like that. So when we wound up being broadsided by the fact that in the first trimester, when we had some minor setbacks with some other miscarriages that had happened while we were trying to get pregnant, and they were very early on miscarriages, which don't, it's sad. Anytime you kind of see that positive pregnancy test and you're like, oh, wait, I'm not,
Yeah.
So we were just kind of like, okay, well, this is probably par for the course, but we're upon holiday time. Another family member was also pregnant at the time. So it was like, how do we hide this? And so, because we weren't ready to tell, because when one morning I was just having severe cramping, and I was like, okay, well, I'm probably miscarrying, like kind of been here before, here we go again. And there was spotting and some bleeding. So I called my OB and she said, go to the emergency room just to make sure everything's fine. Well, lo and behold, we see a strong flickering heartbeat. And we were a little bit further ahead than what we thought. So I was like, okay, this is awesome. But then it was met with the news that probably you're probably going to miscarry, because there was what's called a subchronic hematoma in between where the placenta was implanting on the uterine wall. And at that point, the doctor said the best case, which, we had under a 10% chance of making it out of the first trimester at that point. I was around 8.5 weeks at that point. So very newly pregnant. Just said, pick up your older son. My son was 2 years old at the time. You're on bed rest, very minimal moving, really just, so my whole life had to change at that point. Which I was like, okay, well, this is fine, but how am I going to hide that everything's fine with me, no big deal, but I can't pick up my kid, and I'm like sitting down a lot and not doing a lot throughout like holidays here with family. I'm like, this is very stressful. So, and it was really hard for my older son to understand where, we would be running together and pick him up, all the traditional like motherhood things you were doing and active and going. So it was just like, all right, well, we're going to have a lot of cuddle time and we're going to watch a lot of TV. So, kind of fast forwarding a little bit, we made it through the first trimester, and it was kind of like we got all clear from the doctors. They were like, hey, everything cleared up. This is awesome. Like, okay, first trimester hiccup, we're all good. We're in the clear. Here we go. Like, no big deal. Only to be met with a phone call the next day telling us we have to come in immediately to the hospital. Like, they scheduled the appointment for us. There was like, they were like, bring your husband, partner, whoever you have with you. And I was like, okay. And I was like, well, what is this? What is this about? They're like, well, we found something on the testing. You need to come in immediately. And I'm like, all right. So again, I'm like, let me sort out. And the appointment was within an hour. I'm like, this is very stressful. I
Oh
have a
my
kid that needs to be
gosh.
picked up within an hour. I have to coordinate and like get my husband, not get my husband from work, but like, coordinate all these things. So it all worked out. And it turned out that the test that they did, there was elevated alpha fetal proteins in my bloodstream, which is indicative for spinal bifida in a baby. So it's like, okay, well, what does all that mean? So they went in, they did the imaging, and what we saw was the spinal cord was completely intact. Awesome. That ruled out spinal bifida. But what they did discover was I had complete placenta previa, meaning the placenta was completely over the opening of the uterus to the cervix, and that it was showing signs of accreta, meaning the placenta was growing into the uterine wall. But they also saw that I had something called leaking placenta. So the reason why the alpha fetal proteins, which are the proteins from the baby, were in my bloodstream and elevated was because the baby was losing nutrients to me. Like the placenta extracts, I mean, don't quote me on this, but like, the placenta is there to provide, to take nutrients from the mom and like feed the baby. So, but what was happening was it was becoming a two-way street. The baby was losing nutrients, and where it's not supposed to be leaking into the mom's bloodstream.
Okay. Yeah.
So it was like a two-way street versus the one-way street.
Yep.
Best way I can describe it. So, at that point they were like, you're back on bed rest 100%. And if you hemorrhage, you're in the hospital on bed rest till the end if we can stop the hemorrhage. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I am 12 weeks right now.
That's a lot of bed rest.
Yeah. So I'm like, all right. So I had 2 days of freedom, got one workout in because it was clear. And it was one of those where I was like, what's going to happen? And again, of course, being 12 weeks, I'm thinking, okay, we don't get hit viability until, really, like, I don't want to say guaranteed because nothing's really guaranteed, but the chances increase as you get closer to that 26-week period. Technology is brilliant, and there are so many advances in medicine that babies born younger have survived. But I'm like, oh my goodness, okay, this is totally, we had also, because the news that we were all clear, we told our immediate family and friends. And I'm like, oh, all right, maybe we jumped the gun a little bit here. What are we gonna do? And so it was like, it was just derailing. It was one of those where you're completely out of control of what happens. And you have to kind of put trust into the experts and what I found was, it's complex to put words to it, where trusting the experts, but we all want control of us and our surroundings. And so, it was hard for me to kind of find not even a middle ground, but just that groundedness of what can I control? What can I control? Where do I let my thoughts go and not go? And how do I keep not just a happy-go-lucky presence for my older son, but just keep things from him, I mean, he was 2 at the time. So a 2-year-old, they understand a lot, but not a lot. Like, he knew, he's like, oh, mom's pregnant, there's a baby in there, like trying to get that understanding. But then I'm like, do I play it up or not? Like, what if the baby's not, he doesn't arrive? Like, how do we explain this? Like, so just kind of went with the sort of, and I think it was a self-protecting, like, nothing's wrong, but I'm not going to let my mind go to where things could be really gravely wrong.
Yeah.
And at that point in the pregnancy, it was weekly appointments. Every other week was an ultrasound. And then on the opposing weeks, it was meeting with the maternal fetal medicine team and my OB/GYN. And so I basically lived at the hospital.
I was gonna say, oh my gosh, this sounds so exhausting.
Yeah, it was like I was there every single week. And so out of that, trying to help framework as best as possible for myself, I kind of created a routine. It was the only time, like, I refused to take the elevator. I would walk up the steps. Like, it was my OB/GYN's office was on the 7th floor, and I was like, I'm walking up the steps, nice and easy, because it was just giving back that control to me. Like, okay, I can still do this. I'm allowed to do this. I can still kind of climb that mountain, so to speak. No matter what they're going to tell me, I'm going to climb that mountain to get up there and like be okay. And so then at the end of the appointments, I would go, there was a cafe in the hallway, and I wound up eating their sweet potato fries and a chocolate milk after everything. It was like the best thing ever. So just to process what they said, it wasn't always negative. It wasn't always, it was just allowing me to have space before I re-entered home life. And also trying, at the time I was still own a business. I was in the first year of my business and trying to keep my business going.
Oh my goodness.
What that looked like. So it was just trying to give myself space so that I could comprehend what was going on and just be before going. But what I found was, as the pregnancy progressed and more limitations were put on me, that framework that I was like, okay, I got this. Like, I know mindset. Like, I have an athletic background. I've gone through sports injuries. I know, oh my God, it just flew out of my brain. Mental imagery and like running things through. And I get like the mindset. I'm like, okay, I'm going to rock this. This is no big deal. When I feel tired, I'm going to imagine myself, in the strongest days of my competition life. And I'm going to imagine this. I'm going to rehearse this, and kind of really searching for that locus of control in an uncontrollable situation. And, whether that was good, bad, or indifferent, I think it does help process, because as humans, we need to control. It doesn't mean we aren't good with flexibility, but if you look at points in history of survivors of tragic, or whether it be natural or human man-made tragedies, those who survive are the ones who can figure, if I can just do this, I'm okay. If I do XYZ, boom. And if I get to even do this, wow. And it builds off of that, because it's that tangible control. I can keep moving forward. It's not things aren't as bad, it's I can still survive. I'm here.
I've made it through some really heavy stuff. I can do one more thing. Yeah.
Exactly. It's so, but as things progressed, it was like, I was starting to get contractions and things were happening. I was in labor and delivery, and they were like, there's nothing we can do. If this baby comes, there's nothing we can do. So then, excuse me, it was then starting to face the reality of, this is life or death. This, I may not meet this baby. I don't know who this is here. And then it came into, there's a significant chance, just with the way the placenta was, with the, the veins and just the way it was, that I may not make it through. And that part, and where I had to start understanding that, started to, I don't want to say started deteriorating, but it was kind of like the elephant in the room I didn't want to discuss. I couldn't go there.
Yeah, I could imagine. Like, oh my gosh, how did you, I mean, once you had that understanding of holy moly, like this could also cost me like my life, like was there a point where you came to terms with it or you oh
I I actually don't know. I mean, I think one thing I knew I could never do was I never told my husband. And I think for me, if I said it out loud, I would have to really come to terms with it.
mhm,
It wasn't that I didn't think he was capable of handling that news or that information. He knew there was probably a good chance we may not meet the baby.
mhm,
And for that, what we did, I was our first one, we didn't discover, we don't not discover, we didn't know if he was a boy or a girl. And
okay,
then we were like, oh, the second one, we'll find out. And then my husband loved not finding out so much that he's like, let's do it again. And I was like, okay, I can get on board with that. Because kind of full story, he wanted to find out the first time. And I was like, well, why? We had like, this is one of the best secrets ever. And like, I love it when people find out. I love when people don't find out. I mean, it's just so cool. Either way you do it.
yeah,
So he's like, okay. And I was like, just for the first one, let's just not figure out because we don't have anything to compare if it's a boy or a girl. Like,
mhm,
and for us, we didn't care. We weren't wishing one way or the other. It was just like, we'd like a child and we're happy we can have our own children with, very little setbacks. And so with the second time, when things kind of got grimmer, so to speak, and just a lot of more severe uncertainty, I was like, I need to know who is in there. Like,
mhm,
I need to know if it's a boy or a girl. And so, but I told my husband, I was like, nobody else can know. I don't want anybody else to know besides he and I, because one, I didn't want to hear anybody else's critic. We kind of kept everything to ourselves a lot. Close friends and family knew we were in a high risk pregnancy. They didn't really know the vastness to it because I just really didn't want to hear anybody invalidating what I was going through
yeah,
or overly worrying.
mhm,
Again, part of that control, part of that, like, I need this for me and I can't have other people help me, but it was just like, I need to get through this
mhm.
and I don't need extra voices in my head,
All the
you know?
outside noise, yeah,
So, and it was great. Like, we knew he was a boy and it was like, I felt a release of like happiness. I was like, okay, I know who's here. And so kind of developing that mantra, like, we got this, you and I, we're getting through this. Like, we're gonna get here. We defied the odds in the first trimester. It's no big deal. We got this. Just hang in, trust. I kind of was like, say, because I talked to my older son when he was in utero, and it was just like, don't worry, your big brother knows it's a great home. You don't need to leave. Everything's good. Like, just kind of that self-talk to him, but also to me, to be
yeah,
like, it's all good. Everything's good. Um, but going back to the point of coming to terms with it, I mean, one, I never vocalized it, but I'll never forget the point when I was eventually admitted to the hospital because I did have a hemorrhage. And this was at 33 weeks, where it was funny because my OB was like, I don't know how you've made it this far. And I'm like, I don't know. I was like, I'm stubborn. I was like, my older son's stubborn. He gets it for me. We're going the distance. But then eventually, hemorrhage had happened, which with the pregnancy, as the weeks progress, your chances of hemorrhaging do go up.
okay,
So that was one of those things. It wasn't inevitable. The percentages just increase. So so admitted, gratefully they stopped everything, because I just remember kicking that first night, I kicked everybody out of the room because I was like, I need everyone out. Like, I just literally, I mean, kind of, if you see those TV shows, like everything's happening around you. And the person, even if when they're awake, they're like, just kind of like, the actor or actress is like in the bed, just like kind of staring around, like, I don't know what,
Yeah.
and that's how I felt. And I was like, everybody out. And I kicked everybody out. And, I had 2 IVs in me, and my husband's like, what do you need? I was like, I just need to be in the bathroom. Cause like, I wasn't sick. I didn't need to use the bathroom. I just stood at the bathroom, just staring in the mirror. And I was like, I can't have this baby tonight. I am not prepared. I was just like, I can't do this. Not tonight. Like, of course I had no control over this, but I was just like, this is not happening tonight. And just that like breathing moment of like, oh my goodness, like this is not, it's not, so much of like, this is not how I saw it happening, therefore it can't. It was mentally, this cannot happen. So got back in bed, and, all night, everything was just going. They were able to, like I said, stop the hemorrhage, but they had to stop the active labor contractions that were going. That was more the bigger concern. I mean, the hemorrhage was a big concern, but they got stopped pretty quickly, which is great. But it was the active labor contractions that they were also concerned about, because with this, C-section was the only way that the baby could be born, because the placenta cannot be born before the baby, or else basically death occurs with the baby. So fast forward, everything stops. They admit me to the hospital, and so that was on a Sunday. On Wednesday morning, so every morning the whole team would come in. It was also a teaching hospital, so there would be resident students, and because this was a rare case, everybody came, which is fine. Yeah. And they asked my permission, all that stuff. I was like, sure, why not? So, came in, morning meeting, but then this morning, on Wednesday morning, it was just the head doctor came in, and I was like, where's everybody, And he's like, it's just me. And he came in and sat down, and he's just talking. He's like, so, just kind of making small talk. And I'm like, this is really odd. What's going on?
Were you so concerned? Like, what the heck?
Yeah, I was like, this is so different. I'm like, there's a change in here. So then he got up and kind of presented me with the document, basically stating, understanding that's a high risk, everything, that their job is to get the baby here and then try and save me. So essentially presented with, hey, you get to sign your life away, understanding the circumstances, and the only way out of this is for you to have this child. Like, there's no other option. We can't guarantee. And you have less than a 50% chance of surviving. And, your son has about the same percentages here. And that, I'll never forget the feeling. Like, I just felt so heavy. I felt like the whole room just slowed down, kind of like, just time stopped. It wasn't like the air was sucked out of the room. It was just like, oh, this is okay, this is real. Like, I wasn't in denial, but I had to face that reality of the inevitableness that how fragile my mortality was. Like, this is completely out of my control, as much as, and they were awesome and hearing my thoughts on it. Not that I was like, this is how you should do the surgery, because I don't know, that's not my wheelhouse. It was like, are you okay with this? This is their plan. This is what we see. This is how we'll proceed, So they did a brilliant job in including me in the process, but it was then that inevitability of, you have no control over this. This is going to happen, and this is the only thing that can happen to get you to the other side. But there's no guarantees you or your child are going to go to the other side and come out okay. And that point on, so that was Wednesday morning, and seeing when my husband and my son would come to the hospital to visit, it got tougher and tougher to say goodbye, because I didn't know, especially my son, if I was going to see him again.
Oh, wow.
And so that was one of those things where I was like trying to keep more composure. And I will say, nurses are angels, because they were phenomenal, like overnight, because I'd be a mess. I'd be like, my son's at home, I'm stuck here. His whole life has been altered. Again, at this point, he's a little over 2.5. He doesn't know why mom's there, except, oh, baby, mom has to be here because of baby, but there's no baby. And where I was, it wasn't that I was on, hospitals typically set up where sick or injured, halls. I was on the maternity side. So there were crying babies, there were mom with babies, there were like, so he's like, wait a minute, baby's in mom's belly. I'm confused, and we tried to keep the routine as normal as possible for him, but he knows there's something wrong.
Yeah.
So, and because when mom was there, like, I still had, I had 2 IV ports open at all times, just because the severity of it. They, had blood on hand for me, 24/7, and I had my own like OR. If anything happened, like everything would get bumped. I was priority number 1. They had 2 ORs in the hospital where they did for maternity ward, and one of them was like guaranteed mine. So
it has your name on it.
yeah, I was like, I'm VIP, not the way I want to VIP, but so like they were all set up, and the other thing to that is like basically depending on if I hemorrhaged again, there was between 10 to 20 minutes to get the baby out for more insurance of life, like and everything else. So so that was one thing I also didn't tell my husband, because he was also holding down the fort at home and he was still working. Gratefully, we actually didn't live that far from the hospital. But at certain points of the day, it could be a very, very far drive with traffic. And then my other son, if we didn't have childcare, he can't show up to the hospital with mom, in the OR. Dad could, so there was just so many logistics with that. And gratefully, we did have a plan for that, where my mother-in-law would come overnight and be there and kind of help, just because babies oftentimes like to come overnight. So you never know.
Yeah.
So the day that, it was so funny, the day that everything happened was the day that I was like, I felt phenomenal. I hadn't had contractions all day. I was getting non-stress tests where they were monitoring the baby's movements 3 times a day. And everything was great. They're like, everything's good. And, they're like, I think you'll make it to your scheduled C-section. I was like, yeah, that'll be great. On and on and on. I'm like, I feel great. And that day they allowed me to go supervised, but unsupervised, outside and eat lunch with my son and my husband. And which is nice, because before they were like, nope, you're in the hospital, you can't, like, you have to stay here. And I'm like, I just want to walk, I want to move.
Yeah.
So I was like completely bedridden. And so they allowed my husband to take I think it was a walkie-talkie, I don't know, or cell phone or something. And the nurse brought us down to there was a courtyard, brought us down to the first floor to the courtyard. And she's like, okay, she's like, anything, call, like anything. So it was just so nice. And I remember sitting there and I was like, it just felt so normal. And albeit it was only a week at that point that I was in the hospital, but what I think, if you've never been in the hospital for multiple days, what people forget is it's very, and as homey as it was, I mean, I kind of joke, I said, I had the corner suite. I mean, there was a couch, there was a recliner. I had a gorgeous window with a nice view. It wasn't, the hospital was not in the city. It was kind of on the outskirts of a city. So it was very nice, but it's still clinical.
Yeah.
It's still stripped down. And so you lose, days, you lose different things, you lose really just that familiarity. And so just sitting out there and feeling the sun on your face, and the nurses were great. They did take me down and they did, because they're like, you got to get outside every day. And they were really great about that. But it was a different feeling of like sitting outside with a nurse there with you, and very lovely people. I like lots of great conversation. Or, I'm going to say, for lack of better terms, a supervised visit with your family with the nurse standing there, and like she's having her break over here, sort of like, doing her thing, but still you're like, hi, I can still see you.
Yeah, I know you're there.
Exactly. And it's just like being out there, I just felt like this is amazing. My son is running around. There was a little fountain. He was like kind of like putting his hands in. It was just so nice and warm because it was June and it was starting to warm up and everything. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like, life is still normal. Life can still go on. But yeah, it just was kind of crazy because as soon as they left, I was like, everything's good, everything's great. And then everything was not. And that's where like literally, I mean, you always wonder, I mean, at least I always wondered, those pull cords in the bathroom, like how quick do they come? And do they really like work? Found out that day they work real quick.
Oh, really?
Because before the non-stress, like I just said goodbye to my family, and before the non-stress test in the afternoon, I was like, I just have to go to the bathroom real quick. And they were like, okay. She's like, I'll get you privacy. She's like, you can go, you'll be fine. Just walk there by yourself. Like, cause I could walk to the bathroom. They didn't need to like help me to the bathroom. Like, they were really good with that and like allowing for certain privacy. But as soon as I got up and I got to the bathroom, I was like, this isn't good, and I will never forget, like, I mean, I'm a tall woman. I'm about just shy of 5'11". And I hit the cord because I hemorrhaged, and this nurse, she had to be all but 5'2", comes in, like sweeps me up, carries me back to bed. Cause she's like, oop, and then a flood of nurses and doctors were in there. And I just remember kind of laying back in bed and just kind of like not releasing control, but just being like, okay, we need to go internal and just focus. Like this is happening. This is imminent. And at one point, and I didn't realize, I must have just totally zoned and gone in the zone, like internal, because a nurse tapped my shoulder. She's like, you called your husband, right? And I was like, what? No. She's like, call him. And so I called him, and I was just, I don't know what I said. It probably something to the effect like, it's happening. Baby's coming. You need to get back here or something. They may even talk to him. I don't remember much about that. And after that, it was just like so many doctors, and the same doctor, the head doctor that was on Wednesday, he was also on Sunday. He had been practicing, I don't know, 30 years. And I'll never forget the look on this guy's face after he saw the bathroom. He turned, he's like, OR stat. And like, I was like, oh, okay. And and I can't tell you how much time had passed, what time, like I cannot, like, because that was something that was just like was focused on me. And then kind of a bit of a miracle bit with it, there was a nurse who stayed later over her shift with my older son for delivery of him, and was there, and kind of, I'm gonna say what you see in the movies, like, so like classic Hollywood. I'm on the bed being wheeled into the I don't know if a stretcher, I don't know what it was, but like wheeled down the hall, and all of a sudden you feel this like familiar tap on my shoulder, and she's like, Katherine, I'm your nurse, Lorena. I delivered your older son. And I was like, what? And it was like, oh my goodness. And it was kind of, I kind of looked up at her, and because of the fluorescent lighting, I was like, she had like a halo around her. I was like, oh my goodness. And then the same anesthesiologist who was in the OR with my older son, it was the same anesthesiologist. And it was like, gave me a lot of comfort. And that's why I say, like, there's a power to those who are there with you and like fully there with you in those critical times, that are human and empathetic and understand and can strip back that, medical front.
Yes.
And just be.
Yes.
And they were phenomenal. And I just was like, okay, well, everything's gonna be fine now. And my husband showed up at some point. I was in the OR, that was one of those things. And I kind of looked over, and because of the nature of it, I had to have 4 ports open, so 4 IV points. And so kind of like, your arms are stretched out. So it was like, I could see him, but I was like terrified to lose my focus. Not that I didn't want to look at him, but I just remember him stroking my hair. And because of the complex nature of the C-section, he was there, but he was not there. Like they wanted him in the room, but they also told him there's a chance you're going to be pushed out of the room. Like anything that goes wrong, he can't be there. So my son was born and didn't cry. I had no idea if he was alive. And it wasn't, to me, it was just like, I wanted to talk to the doctors to hear, but they were so quiet and quickly working because there was only a matter of moments before when they got him out to working on me to stop the internal bleeding with everything the way it all was, that it was like, I don't want to distract them. And then at one point, I don't know what happened, but I started feeling like immense pressure and just like in my eyes, and like started seeing black dots, and there was like a busyness of the room. I have no idea what happened. But there was a flurry behind me, and I like couldn't turn. I just remember feeling just sinking into the bed. I was like, I don't know what's going on.
Oh my gosh. Were you like, this is it? Like, this is where it ends?
A little, but I was just like, kind of like, it was weird. Like I was seeing, but then it was like a black circle, and both eyes were like getting bigger. And I was like, am I passing out? What's going on? And I heard the anesthesiologist saying something like, we're losing her, but something's wrong. She needs us, and just like going. And at that point, my son was stable enough that they were going to bring him over to me, but that got ushered away. Not that, but he was ushered away. And my husband was just like, I'm going with the baby. And he's like, I want to stay with you. And I was like, go with the baby. Like, that's all I could like get out. And so he went up to the NICU with the baby. And the next thing I kind of remember, it was I was in the PACU recovering. And I was just like, kind of like, just started talking. And the nurse was like, oh, you're awake. And I'm like, yeah, what happened? Because the other part of it was they might have had to do a hysterectomy with the delivery if they couldn't get the placenta out. And I just assumed that they had done that because I was like, was there, but it was not like, it kind of just, there was a lapse in time where it was like, started black and was done. And I woke up here and I was like, oh, they probably put me under or whatever. Like, and she's like, oh no, because she's like, you didn't have a hysterectomy, everything's fine, monitoring your signs, stable. And I remember being like, I am so thirsty and it is really hot in here. And she's like, okay, here's some ice chips. And I was like, no, it's really hot in here. And I was like breaking out and just sweating so bad. And I was like, okay, I gotta get these like just blankets off. And it was tough because I still had like IVs. And she's like, are you okay? And I'm like, it's just really, really hot. I'm like, it is hot in here. Well, it turns out I was going hypothermic.
Oh no.
Yeah. So she's like, let me take your temperature. My temperature was 92.8. And I was like, she's like, grab the ice chips away from me. She's like, you need blankets. They grabbed what's called a bear hugger and like encased me to heat to warm me up because they're like, she's going and I was like, get these heated blankets out. Like they encased me in heated blankets and they put me in this like I said, like bear hugger. I think it's called bear hugger to heat me up. And I was just like, I'm like, oh my God, it's so hot. It's so hot. But once they got that thing around me, I was like, oh God, I was like shivering uncontrollably because I realized because that's what happens. So, you may have heard stories of like hikers that wind up like taking off their clothes because it gets so cold, like they are hypothermic. You would think you would want to put more clothes on, but the body is trying to heat you up. So it sends you mixed signals. And so,
I did not know that.
Yeah, it is the most bizarre thing. Do not recommend. not something to deal with. But yeah, it was just like, so that was like the whole process. And in that, it was just like, oh my God. So my body had lost just enough blood that I didn't need a transfusion. They were able to kind of keep things steady enough. But through all of that, it was something, and I kind of say like with um something in that delivery, I don't know, kind of got my mind trapped to the point that about with he was in the NICU for about 12 days, actually did really well, didn't need to stay for a long time. But my mind got stuck to the point where I was just reliving like going into the OR, but I couldn't get out. Um,
Oh,
and so I started having nightmares about that I was trapped into the OR and I couldn't get out. And I could hear him, but I couldn't hear him. And he was so far away. And because of the nature of the delivery and because he was premature, we were still going back to the hospital every week. And I started having panic attacks in the hospital because I was terrified that he was going to be stuck there. And it, I kept being on this like continuous loop of a story. And my husband was like, I can't help you. I don't know. Like, I just kept, I forget what the story was telling, but I was just saying the same thing over and over again. Not like I was, I don't know how to articulate it, but it wasn't like just the same thing over and over again, but I was like stuck in a dream of just like, of all the trauma that had happened between the delivery to then kicking into being like, I've got to be there for my older son, my younger son, to then leaving my baby in the hospital and being discharged and being like, no, like no one ever talks about the trauma of leaving a child in the hospital or leaving the hospital when you've had a baby without a baby. Like you're supposed to leave the hospital with the baby,
yeah.
and they like that is not talked about. And then the other voices, family, friends, and what have you, and be like, oh, well, the pregnancy wasn't that bad. You're here, he's healthy, everything's great. And it's not ill-intended.
Right.
It's the misunderstanding of the the measure of what is a success and what isn't.
Mhm.
That's a success in their eyes, albeit yes, brilliant success. We're here. We're alive still.
Mhm.
That was the goal. But the bigger piece is that emotional, what happened in that time.
Mhm.
And then the toll it took on my husband and my older son, myself, and, most definitely my younger son. I mean, like he's part of this process too.
Mhm.
And that whole area of it's not a getting back, it's just processing and how to support. And I'll never forget another point in my postpartum PTSD recovery where I was trying to figure out not who I was, but it's that point of I know my body. I was a former athlete. I knew I can push myself. I knew I could go. I could like anything I wanted to do, my body would just produce.
Mhm.
But again, we forget there's the mind and the body. And when one's off, the other's not going to produce. And I'll never forget, like, I'm a big runner and I ran track in college. And I was like, okay, I'm going to start running and I'm going to find not myself again, but it just go back to the things I was doing, obtain that normal life.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know if I tripped or fell, but I was on the sidewalk. I felt freshly skinned knees and just feeling this weight of like, I'm done. I'm tired. Like, I can't, it wasn't control. It was, I don't know this body. I don't know this life. Like, I was just floundering, trying to figure
Mhm.
out all of this when there's no context to help you process it. I was seeing a therapist at the time. But it's that notion of the therapist was phenomenal and instrumental in my recovery, but it's the outside work where you're faced with, I still have to be mom. I'm still trying to run a business. I still have to be me. I'm still, and my husband's so supportive, but it's still like we have our relationship. There's still like all of those things, and still putting up, I'm gonna say, a front to everybody else that, like, yeah, life is great, but it's not.
Mhm.
And when you try to open up to some people getting the, well, it really couldn't have been that bad. He's here. Everything's great. You survived. You're doing well. Look at this. You're still showing. No, it doesn't mean that you can handle life. Things can be bad and suck and just suck. And that's okay. And they don't need a definition of, you don't need to positively spin it. Things can suck. And that is 1,000% okay. And going through this whole experience, I don't want to say it wasn't great joy, but it gave me a deeper perspective on when people go through things and someone comes to you to tell you something, they're not always asking for an interpretation or for a spin of positivity.
Mhm.
Sometimes they're searching for their own validation and peace within their story. And I don't want to say it's tough to help people understand, but it can be frustrating for any individual that goes through a traumatic event when they don't have that in their circles around. And because you're stuck, not only yourself trying to process it, but being told that, oh, you should have processed it. Everything's fine. Where events take a long time to go through. And I think it's critical for people to tell their stories. And that's why I love this podcast, that people can come on and tell and take things from each person's story. Maybe they haven't gone through the exact same thing, but there's aspects of it that can be taken and ways to heal. And the biggest thing I can say, because this is what I thought going through it, and looking back on it, I'm like, I don't know why people allowed me to care for a newborn and a toddler. I was not well at all. I was not well. But looking back on it, in the thick of the thick, and the times where I would drive places and forget where I was going, or have to pull off to the side of the road because I had a flashback memory and I was just dealing with an anxiety attack or a panic attack with kids in the car, which is not good. I didn't think I was that bad. I thought it was fine. I didn't think what I went through was that bad, because some of the reasons, and there's no blame in those who had said, but after all, he was here. He was healthy. I was here. I was healthy. We came out the other side. We could still smile and thrive. And that was just kind of something I kept telling myself, I'm okay. It's not that bad. Other people have it worse. I'm okay. I can still survive. I can still do the things that I did before. I can still keep showing up to my business and grow. I can still run. I can still push myself, but that's not it. If you are feeling stuck or trauma, it's not creating the significant, not creating, but it's not the significance of that trauma. It's knowing that there's no trauma or thing too small. It's not, there's not a, well, if you hit this, then boom. Yes, of course you need this and this and this, or it justifies as this. It's okay to, in any situation, there's no situation bigger or small that it's not okay to seek help or to allow for bigger understanding to help you process it. And it's 1,000% for things not to be okay and you not to put a spin on it. And for things to suck in life, and they don't need a positive spin around it. It can just suck, and that's okay. And I think that isn't talked about enough or shared enough, because certain parts of that time in my life sucked, and I will not put a positive spin on it. Certain parts of it I look back so fondly of like different things and pictures and this, and then there are certain times where I'm like, I don't, and I'm okay with that, because it doesn't need to be changed. It doesn't need to have a beautiful, happy story. It can just suck and be raw. And there are pictures still that I look at and evoke an emotion and make me cry. And that's okay. And it's not that they serve a purpose, but it's okay. I don't need to sit there and be like, oh, it was all rainbows and butterflies and unicorns. Like, no.
Yeah. I think one of my something that is so uncomfortable. I mean, I don't know if it's the same for you, but in my situation, being paralyzed, ending up paralyzed at 14, something that has always been said to me, of course my life could have been taken, and so things, or people have always said, oh, it could be worse, it could have been worse. Absolutely, it could have. And also, I went through some massive shit, so can we just take a moment for that?
Exactly. And it's like, recognize, it's, or I hate that saying, well, it could have been worse. Of course it could have been worse. Anything in life could be worse. So, it's just recognize what it is without justifying on your own terms. And it's, some of it is that the human mind, we crave that justification or that definition or that understanding. And one of the things that was part of my healing process, because I started realizing with different anniversaries, there would be major triggers. And it was hard. It was hard to get through holidays. It was hard to do certain things. I, for a long time, years, couldn't hold a baby, or hear a baby cry, and my son made it. So it's like, it's not that I lost a child. It would throw me back into the situations. It would trigger memories. It had nothing to do with the child that someone wanted me to hold or the child that was crying. It was the internal triggers that I had not processed. And one of the things I did, which was very stressful but needed, was I wrote my whole story down to share with family members, and to not explain, but hopefully for them to draw or have a understanding from where I came from and what it was. And it was scary because I sent it by email. It was scary to send it. It was tough to really write it out too. And just to develop the understanding of, don't be offended when I don't hold my niece or nephew. Don't be offended if I act in a certain way. It has there's zero reasoning with you or anything else. It's literally all about me, and not in a selfish way. It's because I'm not there yet. I'm not ready. And the way I ended it was, I don't know if I'll ever be okay, but I know each day I'm going to show up and keep growing and figuring this out, because I've never been through this before. I've never been here, and I don't know. And I'm okay with not being okay. And so it was interesting to hear back, because some people, like, well, you have to be okay at some point. And I'm like, well, sure, anyone can be okay at some point. Well, what's the definition of okay? And so it was just, or I had no idea it was that bad. Why didn't you tell me? And that's the other thing is, you don't always know it's that bad and you don't know how to articulate. When you're in the thick of it, it's not that you don't want the help. It's hard to know what help or support you need.
Right.
And so that was like, it was kind of interesting on how it was met, like in the whole piece. But it's, finding that little ounce of control, little things of, what can I do to kind of empower myself? Like, what is the easiest tangible thing? You know, I remember at one point it was like, well, I can't walk around the hospital, so I'll just wiggle my toes. Like,
Oh, the little things.
yeah, it was just like, I'm gonna wiggle my toes. Or I'm going to, I wound up offering free fitness and nutrition advice to the nurses because it gave me something to do.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, so wound up like meeting time every day. Like I was like, okay, I can do this. What can I do? What can I do?
That's so fun and so innovative to like come up with that, like with your all this time that you're spending in the hospital.
Yeah, it was just how can I need to move. I have this stress, I have this angst. How can I process it and get rid of it? I don't think the goal was for me to be like, I'm going to come out of this as resilient and not ever have like any mental downfall. That's something we can't control. Like, anything can cause, I'm going to say, a trip in the mind.
Yep.
We like to think that the mind is in of itself a steel force that cannot get sick. No, anything essentially can cause the mind to get sick. It may not be that pivotal thing that was the tipping point. I mean, that small thing may have been the tipping point, but it could have been things before, so it's like, it's okay to seek help for anything you may not be understanding or struggling to process, because it's going to help your mind feel better. It's going to help everything thrive a little bit better.
Yeah. Oh, speaking of being okay, how are you today? Where is your life today? How is your son doing? All the things.
Good. I mean, it's much better. I mean, we're all thriving. I found, I'm gonna say, deeper purpose. It was, also in the hospital room where I wound up rebranding my entire business and finding more of a calling, because I was like, oh, why not?
Oh my goodness, I love that.
And really tuning into, I'm gonna say, this power of giving voice to more of, like, I work primarily with women, only with women actually. And in a stage where, 35 to 55, where there's a lot of seasonal changes in the essence of maybe they're building their families, maybe they're done having children or choose not to have children. But aside from that, there's perimenopause and menopause. And what a vast majority has communicated is these things are sometimes inhibitors of women and not actual, I don't know, I just see this as more empowerment. There's so much, but things that need to be fixed and corrected where it's not that, that you and your body have so much power and can do around you. And knowing that stress isn't bad, stress can be good. Understanding your energy flow. And also, the one thing I love to do and I provide for my clients is the safe space of things can just be. They don't need a definition. You don't need to look as to why, maybe your glutes don't activate. I mean, yes, I'm going to look and see, change the action, biomechanics, but we don't need to search for, well, it's because pregnancy. Well, yeah, that may be the byproduct, but it doesn't mean it's a permanent state.
Mhm.
You know, I argue the things I've done postpartum with my second son have been, would make my college athletic self be like, whoa, wait, I can do that. Things I never dreamed of. I mean, I got into endurance running and never thought I would love it because I was a sprinter jumper in college. Like, but I love going out, and it's not just like a boastful of like, I can do this, but it's like the deeper challenge, and I'm going to say intimacy with myself, that pushing myself a little bit more mentally, and it's not all like, oh, I'm going to go so hard and so tough. Like, it's that awareness of, I can push myself really hard today, but I'm going to peel back because I didn't sleep the greatest, or, my younger son still has some needs that need to be met and he's doing so well. And also teaching him and my older son coping skills and that awareness of, your best every day doesn't mean over 100%. It means you can have high standards, and set your standards high. I mean, I'm a big dreamer, but it means showing up for yourself where you're at that day is going to get you to those big goals. It means bringing the level up to where you are to meet yourself where you're at is going to keep going. And that is the cool thing with endurance running. It's kind of looked at as like, oh, just go hard, go fast, not always fast, but like, with ultra marathoning, it's that awareness, that assessment, that check in, like, where are we at, and staying grounded because some of these events, they are 12 hours long and you are pushing up to see and test your limits. But the same regard, I'm like, my health is the most valuable thing ever. I'm not going to risk my health for it. I have kids. No one's paying me to do this. And I'm doing this because I love the growth within myself that I find. I love helping people push beyond their preconceived limits. And I love seeing those challenges and overcoming them for myself, and that problem solving aspect. I love watching people do things that they couldn't do. And, watching both my children walk was amazing, but watching my younger son, where he had more hurdles and challenges to get through, to become mobile, to speak with speech delays, to, now in the classroom, he needs to work harder mentally, things that people can't see, to cope, to, perform. It's one of those things where it's okay to have that frustration. Provide yourself space to be frustrated. Provide yourself space to be upset at that. And that's okay. That fosters a more positive stress environment to overcome challenges and growth that comes out of it, versus avoiding that. Things can be frustrating and it is okay. Things can be super easy and that is okay. But allow yourself space to have those challenges and be okay if it takes time to master them. Because the coolest thing, like I said, my older son was super quick through the stages as far as like developmental or mobility. I mean, he was like cruising around furniture at 6 months. This is not an exaggeration, to the point where he was running by the time he was a year old, just flew right through all of them, which is not normally typical.
Yeah.
But that's just what he did. And so my younger son, who was not mobile, not even crawling, barely able to sit up at a year old, was just such a polar opposite. But watching him, where he had no idea of these limitations, but watching him go through physical therapy and just show up and keep going, and the resilience that he had also gave me promise of like, no, I can just keep showing up. Where we get bogged down and what cripples us is those outside stories, or the stories that we internalize and maybe outside, or we listen to within our heads and start to believe them. And we limit ourselves. And that's where it's like, no, change your story and you're going to change your life. Like, and with those stories, and again, I will say this too, it's part of your story. It's okay. You don't need to change it to be like positive spin. But, you know, for me, with recovering from the PTSD, with it was finding my way out of that OR, you know, getting my mind where I became trapped. You know, I can't tell you how I became trapped. I don't know how that happened or if there was a switch or something that happened, but allowing just to grow from it is huge, you know. But I needed that downtime. I needed a lot of that frustration, that struggle to be there in order to grow. You know, and I wouldn't change it because it has allowed me to help a lot of people and a lot of clients who have gone through things, maybe to similar aspects, maybe not, but they get that, they find that validation within themselves. They find that safe space, that it's okay. They get that permission to have that validation with their stories and, you know, traumas or things that they've overcome or in the process with, and start to gain that trust with themselves, with their body, with their movement, and that freedom to be able to live. Because I do feel, and it's not always associated with childbirth, but we tend to start to limit ourselves based on certain things versus, you know, going all in and trusting ourselves.
Yeah.
And being like, I can do because I know, which is a scary but powerful statement.
Yeah.
Like, and taking that risk and fully trusting in yourself that you can with anything mentally or physically.
Yeah. I think trusting yourself is one of the hardest things you have to overcome.
It is. And I can't say I fully do it. I mean, there's
Mhm.
glimpses of it,
Mhm.
but that's okay. I don't remember where I read it, but it was like the most difficult relationship you'll have is the one with yourself, and further growing that and understanding it. And I was like, it took me a moment because I was like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I have a great relationship with myself. And then it's like, wait a minute, no, like the words that are going on in your head to what's happening outside, your actions, your awareness, your boundaries, your energy, like those are things that are not taught in school. That would be,
Oh my gosh. Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. Oh my gosh. I have enjoyed getting to know you on a deeper level than I did when we first connected. And thank you so much for sharing your story and being so open and willing to. I appreciate your time and your
Yes.
energy so much.
Thank you. Yeah, it was great. And I do hope it reaches someone and helps them or helps provide clarity or just gives them the permission that they can feel validated in their own story as well.
I love that. Thank you so much.
Yeah.